Rachel was the kind of woman people admired without even realizing it. She was graceful, kind, and always had a warm, welcoming smile. Every Sunday she stood at the entrance of the church, greeting members as they walked in. "Good morning. God bless you," she would say cheerfully, making sure everyone felt at home. People loved her. The church elders always spoke highly of her. She was the perfect example of a devoted Christian. Women admired her, men respected her, and children loved her. She was diligent in the ushering unit, never missing a service, never showing up late, always the first to lend a helping hand. But no one knew who she really was. Rachel had a past, one she had buried so deep it felt like another lifetime. She had built a new life for herself, taken on a new identity, and promised never to look back. The name Rachel was not the one she was born with. It was the one she had chosen when she decided to start over. No one knew the truth, and she intended to keep it that way. Alex was a man who had seen the world. At just 36, he was one of the most successful businessmen in the country. He had built his empire from scratch, turning his small investment firm into a multi-billion-dollar corporation. People called him brilliant. Others called him ruthless. He was a man who never backed down from a challenge, never let emotions cloud his judgment. But there was one thing missing in his life: love. His parents had tried countless times to set him up on dates. They introduced him to beautiful, well-educated women, hoping he would finally settle down. But Alex never felt a connection with any of them. Business was his priority, and he didn't have time for distractions. But everything changed one Sunday morning. It was a bright, peaceful Sunday, and the church service had just ended. Alex was walking out of the auditorium heading toward his car when something, or rather someone, caught his eye. Rachel. She was standing at the entrance, laughing softly as she helped an elderly woman down the stairs. She held the woman's hand gently, her voice full of warmth as she spoke. Her kindness was effortless, her smile radiant. Alex stopped in his tracks. He had seen her before, of course. Everyone knew Rachel. She was always there, always greeting people, always spreading joy. But today, for some reason, he truly noticed her. He watched as she waved goodbye to the woman, then turned to greet the next person with the same warmth. There was something about her, a lightness and energy, that drew him in. Before he could stop himself, he walked toward her. "Excuse me," he said. Rachel turned, surprised to see him standing there. "Yes. I'm Alex," he introduced himself. "I know," she said with a small chuckle. "Everyone knows you." He smiled. "Well, I just wanted to say, you have a way of making people feel at home here." She tilted her head slightly as if studying him. "Thank you, but I'm just doing what I love." At first, their conversations were brief. After service, Alex would stop by to say hello. Sometimes he would ask her about her week and she would ask about his. The exchanges were casual, nothing too deep. But as the weeks passed, their talks grew longer. One Sunday, Alex found himself lingering after service just to speak with her. "Are you always this dedicated?" he asked, watching as she directed some of the younger ushers on where to place the offering baskets. Rachel smiled. "When you love something, it doesn't feel like work." Alex had never met anyone like her. She had a quiet strength and unshakable faith. She wasn't impressed by his wealth, wasn't intimidated by his success. She treated him the same way she treated everyone else, with kindness and respect. And that intrigued him. For the first time in a long time, Alex wanted to know someone beyond just a surface level. So he asked her out to coffee. At first, Rachel hesitated. She had spent years keeping a low profile, avoiding attention. But something about Alex made her feel safe. So she said yes. Their friendship grew quickly. They spent hours talking about life, about dreams, about faith. Alex found himself looking forward to Sundays not because of church, but because of her. 3 months later, he finally told her how he felt. "I don't know what it is about you," he confessed one evening as they walked through a quiet park. "But when I'm with you, I feel at peace." Rachel felt a lump in her throat. Peace. That was something she had searched for her entire life. She had promised herself she would never fall in love. Love meant vulnerability. Love meant risk. But with Alex, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. So she took the leap. "Then let's give this a try," she said softly. Their relationship blossomed like a flower in spring. Alex was thoughtful, protective, and endlessly patient. He made her feel like the most important person in the world. For the first time, Rachel allowed herself to dream. A year later, they stood at the altar, exchanging vows in front of family and friends. "You are my heart, my peace, and my home," Alex whispered as he placed the ring on her finger. "And you are my second chance," Rachel whispered back. It was perfect. For the first time in her life, Rachel felt truly happy. She had built a new life, found a new love, and left her past behind. Or so she thought. For a year, life felt perfect. Rachel and Alex settled into their marriage with ease. Alex, once a man who only cared about business, now found himself making time for late-night conversations, weekend getaways, and quiet dinners with his wife. He loved the warmth Rachel brought into his life, the way she made even the simplest moments feel special. Rachel, on the other hand, finally felt safe. She had spent years running, hiding, and covering her tracks. But now she had found a home in Alex's love. She no longer had to look over her shoulder. She no longer had to fear the past. At least that's what she thought. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning when Alex found the envelope. He had just arrived at his office, ready to start his day, when his assistant Mark walked in. "Sir, this came in the mail for you. No sender name, no return address." Alex barely glanced at it. He was used to people trying to send him threats, business deals, or even ridiculous blackmail attempts. He was a billionaire. Things like this happened all the time. "Throw it away," he said, reaching for his laptop. Mark hesitated. "Are you sure? It looks different." Alex sighed, taking the envelope from Mark's hands. It was thick, the paper rough beneath his fingertips. He turned it over and frowned. There were no markings, no logos, nothing. Just his name written in bold black ink. Curious, he opened it. Inside was a single file. At first he thought it was about him. But as he flipped through the pages, his breath caught in his throat. It wasn't about him. It was about Rachel. Or rather, Delilah. Alex's hands tightened around the file as he read through it. Photos. Newspaper clippings. Criminal records. A name circled in red ink. Delilah. A woman accused of robbery, blackmail, and sedition. A woman who had disappeared years ago, presumed dead. A woman who looked exactly like his wife. His chest tightened. His mind raced. This had to be a mistake. There was no way his Rachel, his sweet, loving, kind-hearted wife, could be the same person in these reports. But then he saw the final page. A letter. "Alex, your wife is not who she says she is. The woman you love is a fraud, a criminal, and a liar. I have more proof. If you want to keep this quiet, you will pay. If not, the world will know who Delilah really is." No name. No contact information. Just a message that felt like a knife to the gut. Alex closed the file, his heart pounding. He had spent his entire life in control. Nothing surprised him. Nothing shook him. But now, for the first time, he felt completely unsteady. Who was Rachel? That evening, when Alex returned home, he watched Rachel closely. She greeted him with her usual smile, kissing his cheek as she took his briefcase. "How was work?" she asked. "Fine," he said, forcing a smile. His mind screamed at him to ask her, to confront her right then and there. But he didn't. Not yet. Instead, he decided to test her. "Rachel," he said casually, "I've been thinking. I want to know more about your past." Rachel froze for a fraction of a second. It was so quick that anyone else would have missed it. But Alex didn't. She laughed softly, setting a plate of food in front of him. "You already know everything that matters." His stomach twisted. "Still," he pressed, "it'd be nice to talk about it. Where you grew up. Your childhood. Your family." Something flickered in her eyes, something guarded. "There's nothing to tell," she said with a smile. "My past is boring." Why? Alex knew that smile. It was the same one she used on strangers at church, the same one she used when she wanted to avoid something. But why was she lying? Alex didn't sleep that night. Long after Rachel had fallen asleep beside him, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He needed answers. He needed the truth. And if Rachel wouldn't tell him, he would find out himself. The next morning he called Mark. "I need you to hire someone," Alex said. "A private investigator. Discreet." Mark was silent for a moment. "Sir, is something wrong?" Alex hesitated. Everything was wrong. "Just find someone," he said, hanging up. The days passed slowly. Alex went to work as usual, came home as usual, and pretended everything was fine. But inside he was unraveling. Rachel noticed. "You've been quiet lately," she said one night as they lay in bed. Alex forced a chuckle. "Just work stress." She turned to him, resting a hand on his chest. "You can talk to me, you know. About anything." Anything. The irony of her words burned. "Same goes for you," he said, looking into her eyes. "You can tell me anything too. No matter what." Something flickered in her gaze. Something that almost looked like fear. But then she smiled. "Of course." Why? Alex turned off the light. As Rachel drifted off to sleep beside him, he lay awake, staring into the darkness, waiting for the private investigator's call. Waiting for the truth that would change everything. Because deep down he already knew. Rachel wasn't who she said she was. Alex felt like he was walking through a fog, lost in a world that no longer made sense. The past few days had been agonizing, filled with doubts and unanswered questions. The love of his life, the woman he had vowed to cherish forever, was a stranger. Not just any stranger. A criminal. The private investigator's findings weighed on him like a crushing weight. Rachel wasn't just hiding a small secret. She wasn't just running from a mistake. She had once been Delilah, a notorious figure linked to robbery, blackmail, and sedition. A woman who had been on the most wanted list before disappearing off the face of the earth. And now she was his wife. Alex couldn't breathe. He felt like a fool. How had he not seen the signs? How had he given his heart so completely to someone who had spent years lying to him? He wanted to scream. But first he needed to hear it from her. He needed the truth. Late in the afternoon, Alex received a message from the private investigator. "Sir, I have more information. You need to see this." Alex barely hesitated before calling back. The investigator picked up on the first ring. "It's worse than we thought," he said without preamble. Alex's grip tightened on his phone. "Go on." The investigator sighed. "Delilah, or rather your wife, wasn't just a low-level criminal. She was one of the masterminds. The gang relied on her for planning. She was ruthless, sharp, and incredibly good at what she did." Alex felt like the walls were closing in. "She didn't just leave the gang, Mr. Alex," the investigator continued. "She betrayed them. That's why she faked her death. She turned on them, took what she could, and ran. That's why Judah is blackmailing her. He wants revenge." Alex's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a case of a woman running from a past mistake. This was a woman who had lived in darkness, and had managed to escape it. And she had kept it from him. For how long? Did she ever plan on telling him? His heart felt like it was shattering inside his chest. That evening, Alex sat at the dining table, his fingers gripping the blackmail letter. The file lay open beside him, showing the photos of Rachel's past life. He had replayed this moment in his head 100 times. He had imagined different scenarios. Maybe she would deny it. Maybe she would break down in tears. Maybe she would beg for his forgiveness. But none of it could prepare him for what was about to happen. The door opened. "Alex." Her voice was soft, loving. She had no idea what was coming. "I got us something special for dinner." She smiled as she placed the takeout bags on the counter, slipping off her shoes. "It's from that little place you love. Sit down." Rachel froze. Her smile faded as she looked at him, really looked at him. There was something in his eyes, something cold, something distant. "Alex." "Sit." She hesitated before pulling out a chair, her fingers trembling slightly as she lowered herself onto it. Alex didn't speak right away. He slid the file across the table. She stared at it, her breath hitching. Her fingers hovered over the pages, almost as if she was afraid to touch them. "Where did you get this?" she whispered. Alex's jaw tightened. "So it's true." Silence. Rachel swallowed, her lips parting as if she wanted to speak, but no words came out. "I need to hear you say it," Alex said, his voice sharper than he intended. "I need to hear you say the words, Rachel." She squeezed her eyes shut, a single tear slipping down her cheek. Then in the softest voice imaginable she whispered, "Yes. I was Delilah." Alex exhaled sharply, as if the confirmation had knocked the air from his lungs. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Rachel finally opened her eyes, looking at him with desperation. "I didn't want to lie to you, Alex. I swear. But I had to. I was trying to be someone new. Someone better." Alex scoffed, shaking his head. "You let me love you. He let me marry you. And the whole time you were lying. How do I even know who you are? Tears streamed down her face. I'm still me, Alex. The woman who loves you. The woman you love. He clenched his fists. I don't know who I love anymore. The words cut deep even as he said them. He saw the way her face crumbled, the way she sucked in a sharp breath as if he had physically struck her. I was afraid, she admitted. I knew if you found out you'd never look at me the same way. And I was right. Alex's head pounded. So what was the plan, huh? To just pretend your past didn't exist? To hope it never caught up with you? She bit her lip. It wasn't supposed to catch up to me. But it did, he said coldly. She let out a shaky breath. Judah must have found out I was still alive. He's trying to drag me back into that world. But I swear, Alex, I will never go back. Can you promise that? Alex's voice was dangerously low. Can you promise that your past won't put us in danger? That it won't put me in danger? Rachel hesitated. And in that moment Alex knew. She couldn't promise anything. I need time. The words were like ice in the air. Rachel's head snapped up. What? Alex stood up, running a hand through his hair. I can't just forget this, Rachel. I need time to think. Tears welled up in her eyes. Alex, please. Don't do this. I don't have a choice. Her breathing was uneven now, panic creeping into her expression. You said you loved me. You said we'd get through anything together. I thought I knew you, Alex said, his voice cracking. I thought we were building a life based on honesty. But this. He gestured toward the file. This is something else. She grabbed his arm. I am not that person anymore. He pulled away. Pain flickered in her eyes. Alex swallowed, forcing himself to stay strong. I'll be staying at the penthouse for a while. Her breath hitched. Alex. I need time, Rachel, he repeated firmly. I don't know how to process this. I don't know how to look at you without seeing the woman in these photos. Rachel let out a sob, covering her mouth with her hand. For a brief second, Alex wanted to take it all back. He wanted to hold her, wipe her tears, tell her they'd figure it out. But he couldn't. Not yet. He turned away and walked toward the door. And as he stepped outside, the last thing he heard was Rachel's broken whisper. Please don't leave me. But he already had. Alex sat in his penthouse apartment, staring at the city lights through the floor-to-ceiling windows. It had been a week since he walked out on Rachel. No Delilah. And yet his mind hadn't stopped replaying their confrontation. The look on her face when he left. The way her voice cracked when she pleaded with him. The way his heart broke as he walked away. He had thought that leaving would bring him clarity, but all it did was make him feel miserable. He felt hollow, like something vital had been ripped from him. He had told himself that he needed space. That he needed time to process the truth. But truth had only made everything worse. Rachel had been a criminal. A fugitive. A woman with blood on her hands. And yet he still loved her. He hated himself for it. He hated that no matter how much he tried to separate the woman he loved from the past she had buried, he couldn't. He wanted to pick up his phone, call her, hear her voice. But every time he reached for it, he stopped himself. He wasn't ready. And maybe he never would be. Alex knew the rumors had started even before he saw the headlines. Billionaire Alex Carter and wife Rachel separate after 1 year of marriage. Trouble in paradise? Sources say Alex and Rachel haven't been seen together in days. Power couple falling apart? The media was feeding on the mystery of their separation, twisting it into wild speculations. Some claimed Alex had cheated. Others suggested Rachel had betrayed him. Neither of them had spoken a word about the truth. But silence only made people talk more. At church, people had started whispering whenever Rachel walked in alone. Alex had avoided church altogether. He couldn't face the questions, the stares. He knew Rachel was suffering too. He had ignored all of her calls and messages, but that didn't mean he wasn't watching. She had deactivated her social media. She no longer stayed after service to greet people with her usual warm smile. She was fading. And somehow that made it even harder to stay away. One evening, just as Alex was leaving his office, his assistant Mark walked in, looking uneasy. Sir, there's something you should know. Alex glanced up from his desk. What is it? Mark hesitated. It's about your wife, or rather her past. Alex's chest tightened. What about it? Mark sighed and handed him a folder. Judah. the guy who sent the blackmail file, he's dead. Alex's blood went cold. What? He was killed last night in a robbery gone wrong. Alex flipped through the folder, scanning the report. It was a violent scene. Judah had been shot twice, left for dead in an alley. It should have been a relief. The blackmail threat was gone. But something didn't sit right. This wasn't random, Alex muttered. Someone wanted him dead. Mark nodded grimly. And I think your wife knows more than she's letting on. Alex's pulse quickened. He had barely spoken to Rachel since their separation, but now he needed answers. Because if her past was still haunting her, then it might still destroy them both. That night, for the first time in weeks, Alex went home. He wasn't sure what he expected. To find Rachel waiting for him? To see her pretend that everything was normal? Instead, he found the house dark. For a brief moment, panic gripped him. Had she left? Had she run again? But then he heard soft footsteps upstairs. Alex exhaled and made his way up, following the dim glow of a lamp. He found her sitting on the edge of their bed, staring at the floor. She didn't even look up when he walked in. For the first time in their marriage, she looked defeated. I wasn't sure you'd ever come back, she said quietly. Her voice was raw, broken. Alex swallowed hard. We need to talk. She nodded slowly. I know. He sat down across from her, watching the way she fidgeted with the edge of her sleeve. Something she always did when she was nervous. Judah is dead, he said. He stiffened. I know, she whispered. Alex leaned forward, searching her face. Did you have anything to do with it? Her head snapped up, and for the first time in weeks, fire flashed in her eyes. No, she said sharply. I may have a dark past, Alex, but I don't kill. He wanted to believe her. He needed to believe her. Then who did it? He asked. Rachel shook her head. I don't know. Silence stretched between them. Then, in a voice so small it almost broke him, she said, Are you going to leave me for good? Alex sucked in a breath. He had spent weeks wrestling with that question. He had convinced himself that walking away was the only option. That he couldn't be married to someone with a history of crime and deception. But looking at her now, he realized something. She wasn't just Delilah. She was still Rachel. The woman who made him laugh. The woman who held him through his worst days. The woman he had vowed to love in sickness and in health, in darkness and in light. I don't know, he admitted. Her lip trembled, but she nodded. That's fair. They sat in silence for a long time, the weight of everything pressing down on them. Finally, Alex whispered, I want to believe in you. Rachel looked at him with pleading eyes. Then let me prove it to you. Alex hesitated, then nodded. One step at a time. One day at a time. The days following Alex's return home were filled with silence. Not the comforting kind, the heavy, suffocating kind. He and Rachel lived under the same roof, but they barely spoke. They moved around each other like strangers, uncertain and cautious. The warmth they once shared had been replaced by doubt, hurt, and unspoken words. Alex had come back, but neither of them knew if their marriage could truly be saved. Rachel tried. She left him notes on his desk, cooked his favorite meals, smiled at him whenever their eyes met, hoping for some sign of forgiveness. But Alex wasn't sure what he wanted. Could he trust her again? Could he erase the image of Delilah, the woman she used to be, and fully embrace Rachel, the woman he married? He wished he had the answers. But all he had was uncertainty. One evening, as Alex sat in his study, his phone buzzed with an anonymous message. Your wife isn't as innocent as she claims. She may have left the gang, but the gang never left her. Attached was a photo. It was grainy, taken in the shadows of an alleyway. And there, standing with 3 men, was Rachel. The timestamp was 2 nights ago. Alex's hands clenched into fists as anger and betrayal surged through him. Had she been lying to him this entire time? Had she really left that life behind? He needed answers. No. That night, when Alex got home, he found Rachel in the kitchen, humming softly as she stirred a pot on the stove. For a fleeting moment, he was reminded of the early days of their marriage. The days when coming home to her had been the best part of his life. But those days were gone. He set his phone down on the counter. Explain this. She turned, her brow furrowing in confusion. When she saw the picture, her face went pale. Alex, were you ever going to tell me? He demanded, his voice sharp. Rachel swallowed hard. It's not what it looks like. Alex let out a bitter laugh. That's what everyone says when they get caught. She flinched. I swear I didn't go looking for them. They found me. Alex folded his arms. And why should I believe that? She exhaled, gripping the edge of the counter. Because they told me something, Alex. Something I didn't want you to worry about. He narrowed his eyes. And what was that? She hesitated before whispering, they want me dead. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. What? Rachel's voice wavered. They think I betrayed them. That I turned my back on the gang and faked my death to escape. She shook her head. Even though Judah is gone, others still want revenge. They said it's only a matter of time before they finish what they started. Alex felt his pulse quicken. And you thought you could handle this on your own? I didn't want to drag you into it, she admitted. He let out a sharp breath. You're my wife, Rachel. Do you really think I'd let you face this alone? She looked at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. I didn't want to lose you. Alex clenched his jaw, emotions warring inside him. She had hurt him by keeping secrets. But now her life was in danger. And no matter how angry he was, one thing was clear. He wasn't going to let anything happen to her. That night Alex made a decision. He called in every favor he was owed. Contacted the best security team he could find. His men began gathering intel, tracking the gang's movements, trying to uncover their next move. It didn't take long to confirm the truth. The gang wasn't just watching Rachel. They were planning to kill her. Alex refused to let that happen. So they set a trap. And when the gang made their move, they walked right into it. The ambush was swift. A coordinated strike that left the gang members outnumbered and defenseless. By the end of the night, every last one of them had been arrested. And just like that, Rachel was free. Completely. For the first time in years, she didn't have to live in fear. She didn't have to hide. Her past had finally let her go. Later that night, Alex found Rachel sitting on the balcony, staring at the city lights. He sat beside her, watching the wind play with her hair. For a long time neither of them spoke. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Do you regret marrying me?" Alex turned to her, his chest tightening. No. She blinked, as if she wasn't sure she had heard him correctly. "I regret that you didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth," he admitted. "But I don't regret us." Her lip trembled. "Even after everything?" He exhaled, his gaze softening. "Even after everything." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she whispered, "I love you, Alex." His heart ached. Because no matter how much pain they had endured, no matter how much doubt had crept into his mind, he still loved her too. Alex reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "We'll figure this out. Together." She nodded, wiping her tears. And for the first time in a long while, hope flickered between them. Their love had been tested. Their trust had been broken. But against all odds, they had found their way back to each other. And this time they weren't letting go.